Leif Babin, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast, man. I'm so stoked you're here today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time.
DJ, I'm stoked to be here with you. Appreciate what you do, and just love your thoughts about leadership and constantly looking to grow and learn and get better and help others grow. So it's an honor to be here with you.
You have a quote that I love. It says, "There are no bad teams, only bad leaders." Why is that important to you?
It's really cuts to the heart of this concept called extreme ownership, and I think there's uh, this is a quote that I took from a book by a retired U.S. Army Colonel David Hackworth, and he had been taught by his mentors from World War II that there were no bad units, only bad officers, and we just took that and applied that. No bad teams, only bad leaders, because it applies really everywhere. Because we one of the chief tendencies that we see is people blame their team when things don't go wrong. They blame their team. They blame their people, instead of, particularly when they're in charge of that. That's the worst form of leadership, right? If I just had a better team, we'd be better. And the reality is, if you were a better leader, the team would be better and they'd perform better. And it's the opposite of extreme ownership. And we had to write an entire chapter about that in extreme ownership. That's chapter 2. No bad teams, only bad leaders, because it was a very common thing that we would see all the time. And in that chapter, what I wrote about was when I was a BUDS instructor. So BUDS is our basic underwater demolition SEAL training. It's a 7-month training program. And we have about a 70 to 80% attrition rate going through training. And in that training, the toughest part of that training, where most 90% of the people end up quitting the program, is in Hell Week. And Hell Week is 5 continuous 24-hour days of just nonstop physical activity. You get almost no sleep. You maybe get like an hour nap, like 72 hours in. You're absolutely exhausted. You're cold. You're wet the whole time. And I'd been through that training, and so I deployed as a SEAL twice, and now I came back as an instructor, and I got a chance to watch it from the instructor side. So I was out there as what we call the shift officer in charge, and so I've got a team of like 8 or 10 SEAL instructors that are out running this training, and so we're watching these boat crews. So all the class of students going through Hell Week is broken up into boat crews. So it's a team of about 7 people, and each of them has a leader. And so they're all assigned to this 200-pound rubber boat, and so we as we're watching this, the boat crews are getting put in these races, right? These physically exhausting races. They have to sprint over 20-foot high sand berms and paddle out through the surf zone and get smashed by waves, and paddle half a mile down the beach, or run 2 miles down the beach with a boat on their heads. And if you win those races, the instructors always say it pays to be a winner. You get to sit out the next race. So, it's a huge benefit when you're physically exhausted and tired at that level. If you lose the races, you get hammered. And everyone usually is going to get hammered regardless. But if you're particularly falling behind the rest of the crew, you get a whole lot of extra scrutiny, a whole lot of extra push-ups and bear crawls and misery that's being inflicted on you. And these are guys that are already exhausted, already tired. So I think we were 3 days into Hell Week at this point. I was the night shift. And so it's miserable. The guys are tired, they're exhausted, no one slept at all. And there was one boat crew that was winning every single race. And there was another boat crew that was losing every single race. And so we looked at this, and we called the boat crew leaders up. One of my instructors came up with an idea: let's swap out the boat crew leaders and see what happens. And so we took the leader from the worst boat crew that was losing all the races, put him in the best boat crew, took the leader from the best boat crew and put him in the worst boat crew. And I had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, I was like, man, can that really make a difference? It's one person. The boat crew's the same. The races are all the same. The guys are physically exhausted, tired. Nothing else changes. The only variable is one person, the leader. And lo and behold, we send the boat crews out, on their next race, and who comes across the finish line first, but what had been the worst boat crew. So now they're the best boat crew. And what was interesting about that is it just shows the power of leadership, right? One person who, instead of, he took over this team, and the team was fighting amongst each other. They were blaming each other. They were pointing fingers. They were yelling. You could hear them yelling and screaming and cussing at each other. And he got the team aligned. He got them working together. He got them focused. He got them supporting each other. And they ended up winning the next race and a series of races after that. What was also fascinating about this, though, DJ, is that the boat crew that had been the best boat crew that we took the good leader out of, they continued to do well, and they performed neck and neck, and they outperformed the rest of the team, and they barely lost those races to what had been the worst boat crew. They continued to do well, and now they had a weak leader that was put into that situation. And so we say no bad teams, only bad leaders. And what's interesting is it doesn't have to be the senior person in charge. Is what you had in that boat crew was a team of people. There were three or four folks in there that understood what it took to win, and they worked together. They stayed aligned. They kept people focused, even though the senior person wasn't the person driving their performance. You had junior people on the team that stepped up to lead, and it makes all the difference in the world. So it is a powerful. That was just a powerful example that I saw of no bad teams, only bad leaders. And I saw this over and over again in my SEAL career. That when we had a SEAL platoon or a SEAL task unit that was failing or struggling, and oftentimes when the leadership was removed and replaced, if they had a different attitude, if they were humble, if they're willing to take ownership of problems, implement solutions to fix those problems, you would see a remarkable turnaround in the entire team's performance as a result.
I do a lot of work with coaches and I study a lot of coaches. And one thing that I hear at the debrief when the season is over is if the season went well, they'll always say we had really good leaders. We had great leadership within the team. And if the season doesn't go well, we lose in the first round of playoffs. I often hear coaches say, "Man, we just had bad leadership this year." It's so interesting that win or lose, success or failure, the finger usually gets pointed at the leader or lack thereof. So knowing what you know now, what are some of the attributes you think, and you've written several books on this, but what do you think is at the top of the list for the best leaders you've been around, whether it's here, overseas, in the business world? Like, what's the thing that they all got?
The common denominator, I think, in the best leaders is humility. Number one, humility is the most important quality in a leader because if you're not humble, you can't learn from anybody else. You can't listen to others. Your coach might, you might be telling you to push hard, right? If you're on the team and you're like, oh no, we're good to go, right? Or your team says they're good to go, but you feel like, oh, I'm not humble enough to listen to the team or empower them, or even maybe let them brush up against the guardrails of failure so they learn a lesson, open their mind, and I can actually influence them, for the better. And they're actually willing to listen and take on some critiques so that we can improve. And that humility piece, the most important part of this is it breeds complacency when you're not humble, and you can't self-assess. You can't actually look in the mirror and say, okay, how can I improve? What are my weaknesses? What are the things that we need to do better? How can I build better relationships with other people that, okay, someone's not listening to me, or I'm having some frictions with somebody on the team. What can I do to actually put my own ego in check and build a better relationship with them, and maybe listen to them and understand their ideas instead of just trying to demand that people do it my way all the time. So I think that humility is the most important quality of a leader, and that's really the foundation upon which extreme ownership is built. Because extreme ownership just simply means there's no excuses, there's no one else to blame. You have to own everything in your world, not just what you're responsible for, but every single thing that impacts your mission. And this is what it takes if you want to get better. Because if you don't do those things, if you point fingers and cast blame, if you blame it on the team, we didn't have good leaders on the team, and that's why the team didn't do well. If you do that, then you're not ever going to take action. Instead of like, what could I do to actually mentor some people on the team to actually step up as leaders, to actually show them what good leadership looks like, to encourage them to be the leader that the team needs them to be. And if you do that, you can actually solve problems and get better as a result, so that you improve. And you're never going to be perfect. There's no such thing as flawless performance, as my teammate Dave Burke talks about that you had on the podcast recently. So there is no flawless performance. Everyone's going to make mistakes. Everyone's going to have failures, but as long as you're learning from those mistakes and taking ownership of those mistakes, you can implement a solution to fix mistakes going forward, and you get better and better as a result.
It reminds me of your quote, get humbled or be humbled. Do you have a time in your life where you experienced the get humble or be humble? If we're talking about humility being the number one trait, when and where has that showed up for you, Leif?
Man, DJ, that is the life lesson that sadly I have to continually relearn over and over and over again. It's be humble or get humbled. And just when you start feeling cocky about something, we're like, oh, I got this down, or like, oh, I'm totally good to go. You realize like, oh, I'm not near as good as I thought I was. And that slapped me in the face I was in the service. So I went to the Naval Academy out of high school. I wanted to be a SEAL officer. And I didn't get picked up for the SEAL program. It was very humbling. They only took 15 guys because there was a prior enlisted SEAL in my class, and I wasn't one of those 15 guys that got selected to go. And I ended up going out to the surface fleet and serving on two different Navy ships. Ended up being a great experience for me. It wasn't where I wanted to be at the time, but it was a great experience for me because it humbled me, and it made me actually recognize, look, if I actually want to make it into the SEAL program, I'm going to have to do what it takes to get there. I'm going to have to, my physical, my training scores were not near where they needed to be. I was competing as an officer. I was competing with some incredible athletes, right? The captain of our water polo team and the, cross country triathletes and people that were just way better runners and swimmers and endurance athletes than I was. And so I had to train. I had to get myself in better shape. I had to prepare. I had made terrible grades, in college. I had a bad conduct record. I got in some trouble. So those are things that I had to put together a package and become the person that I needed to be in order to get selected for the program. And so it humbled me and put me in a position to recognize that if I want this, I'm going to have to actually do the work and have the discipline to do the work in order to have the freedom to get selected and go and pursue this dream. But part of that on a surface ship, I was assigned as what's called visit board search and seizure, a team leader to our VBSS team. And that means we were boarding ships. At the time, this is before the Iraq War, and there were UN sanctions that were being enforced on Iraq. And so we were boarding ships. There were ships trying to smuggle oil in and out of Iraq and smuggle all kinds of goods to defy UN sanctions. And so I was part of a boarding team, and we just climbed up and down these rope ladders. We call it Jacob ladder into small boats. We'd go board the ships. There were SEALs that would take down some of the ships and then hand them over to our team. And then we would transition the ships to a holding area. So I had a ton of experience climbing up and down ladders, on ships and boarding ships, and I felt like that was something that I knew well. And so when I finally got selected for a SEAL program, and I made it through BUDS, and I made it through 6 months of our SEAL qualification training, and on to a SEAL team. I was in my very first SEAL platoon, and we were going through our workup cycle. And one of the things that we do as the maritime component of the Special Operations Command is visit, board, search, and seizure. So we have to climb up ladders and board ships, or fast rope from helicopters and board ships, or dive underneath a ship and do a hook and climb where we climb up onto the ship. This is what our kind of our bread and butter mission in the SEAL teams. And so as we're doing this, we were doing some surface boardings off the coast of San Diego in our training cycle. And so we were doing these hook and climbs. We come alongside in this high speed boat, and the boat is trying to keep station, and there's waves bouncing you up and down. It's way harder than anything I ever did in the surface fleet, certainly. But I had a lot of experience boarding and ships. And so we take this big, long painter pole with a grappling hook on it, and you hook onto the side of a ship, and you're climbing up, about 20 or 30 feet of freeboard onto an oiler. This was a U.S. Navy support vessel. It's like an 800-foot long, tanker. And this thing's going 12 knots. And we're trying to stay with it and climb up there. And it's pretty dangerous. I mean, if guys slip off the ladder, you can have a 200+ pound guy with 50 pounds of gear falling on individuals below them. You could seriously injure or kill people. And I had one of my really close friends got his neck broken. Thankfully, he recovered from that injury. But he got his neck broken when somebody slipped off the ladder. Everybody's wet and cold, and so it's very dangerous. But we're doing these boardings over and over again. And then after the boarding happens, we clear the ship, we get up to the pilot house, we take down the engine room, and then it's kind of we kind of go admin, we call it, which is the training, the dangerous part's over. We throw one of those rope ladders, the Jacob's ladder, over the side, and we just climb back down onto the ship. And so as we'd already done this, 3 or 4 times. And again, I've climbed up and down these Jacob ladders 1,000 times, boarding ships. And so one of the instructors, I'm going down to climb. One of the training instructors says, "Hey, don't be scared, Babin." And I just looked at him. I was like, "Whatever. I've done this a million times. Whatever." I'm climbing down. So I get down to the Jacob's ladder, and the waves are bouncing up and down. The boat starts to haul in, and right as I go to step off onto that boat, The boat kind of hauls out from the side of the ship. So, the driver's trying to keep station. And so there's probably a 6 foot gap between the ship and where I'm trying to step onto and now where the boat is. And I go right in between the boat and the ship, which would have been fine because I had positive flotation on. We'd done all those kind of safety procedures and checked that. In fact, I even had this like high speed scuba bottle we call a Heeds bottle that was attached to my gear. But the problem was, there's that rope ladder, the Jacob's ladder, has a rope attached to it called a painter line, and that painter line is used to lower and raise the ladder from the side of the ship. And I go right down in between the boat and the ship, and that painter line gets like hopelessly wrapped around my ankle. And so now I'm being dragged upside down underwater at 12 knots by an 800-foot tanker. And it was immediately a really bad situation. So I went from like, what could possibly happen to me? I've done this a million times, no factor, to this is really bad. And in these ships, right? If they go all back full, right? That means they go reverse as fast as hard as they can, with as much throttle as they can. It takes them like 3 miles to stop. So it's not going to be, this is something that like, that's not an option. I'm getting dragged at 12 knots. The boat comes in to try to rescue me, and all they did, they just smashed me in between the boat and the ship. So if I didn't have a Kevlar helmet on, I would have been killed. I probably would have smashed my head like a watermelon. But they ended up, it broke my nose, knocked my helmet off. And I'm trying to just rip my gear off, and I'm trying to grab that high speed scuba bottle that we have, that little tiny scuba bottle we call a Heeds bottle, and it just got ripped away. So I had the mouthpiece kind of up on my shoulder, and it just got ripped away. And so the force of the water, I'm trying. I mean, if you can think of like a GHD sit up with with 200 pounds on your chest. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. And it just like I could get myself just a few inches up, and then in the moment my face would try to break the surface, I just ripped down by the force of the wave. And within probably 45 seconds or a minute, DJ, I was like, I'm not gonna survive this.
Wow.
Like this is over, man. Like and it was the most hopeless feeling. And I just remember thinking, I cannot freaking believe that this is the way I'm going to go. So what a stupid way to go. And it was, luckily I had some really heads up teammates that were up they were on the ladder above me, and they were kind of powerless to do anything. The ship was, the boat tried to come in and rescue me. They couldn't do anything. So they just hauled off. They were kind of just waiting probably 30 or 40 yards off station. And then my teammates were like, man, what can we do? Eventually, some guys were heads up enough to climb back up the ladder. They pointed, climb back up the ladder. And so they climbed back up the ladder onto the deck of the ship, and they started hauling the ladder in by hand, which is a tremendous feat of strength when it's dragging me and all my gear. I weigh 200 pounds plus probably 50 pounds of gear. And they're pulling against the force of the water of the ship that's moving, at 12 knots. And so for what they started dragging pulling the ladder in, and to me it seemed like I was getting dragged underwater by for 30 minutes. It probably was a total of, I don't know, it might have been 2 or 3 minutes max, but it was definitely like I'm not going to survive this thing. It's over. And as they started to haul the ladder in, miraculously the rope just unwrapped around my leg. I popped free and I floated down the side of the ship, and my nose was just filleted open. It was just smashed, and I could see just red. I must have looked absolutely crazy because when the boat team pulled up to pick me up, their faces were like white. I mean, my nose is flayed open, blood's pouring down the side of my face, and I had the biggest smile across my face. Man, I was laughing. I was just so thankful to be alive. And it just was one of those things of like, man, if I just paused a little bit more and realized, okay, yeah, the most dangerous part of the boarding was already over. This was admin, but that's where bad things happen, right? If I just paused just a second or two longer, made sure that boat was on station. We had a boat driver that was new and was trying to learn. If I'd have maybe said, hey, now's not the time to train up a new driver. Let's get an experienced guy on there. There's any number of things that I could have done to prevented that from happening. And I was cocky. I didn't think it could happen to me, and I learned the hard way and almost died. And it was a wake up call of, again, be humble or get humbled, and that humility is something that will keep you alive, right? And it's something that a lesson again that I learned in combat. Just when we thought we had the enemy figured out, when we were in the Battle of Ramadi alongside Dave Burke and his Marines and some incredible soldiers that we worked alongside, we think, hey, we got the enemy figured out. We got they do something we hadn't perceived. and we get hit in a way that we hadn't anticipated, and it kept us humble. It was incredibly humbling, and I'm very thankful for those humbling lessons learned, because I think that humility, again, is the most important quality in a leader. And the moment that you start getting cocky, life is going to find a way to humble you.
Hmm. What a tremendous story. I'm so glad that you survived and that you're here today. A lot of the listeners probably can't relate firsthand to something so severe like that, but what's a takeaway or piece of advice that a leader listening, a coach listening could take from that? One thing I think about, Leif, is this the power of the pause and being able to be humble. And one of the best ways to do that is to be able to pause and not feel rushed. I do a lot of work with athletes on the mental side. One of the things we talk a lot about is when we get into what we call red lights, when we're exhausted and we're away from peak performance, converse to green lights, is that they feel like they're very rushed. When I feel rushed in my warm up, when I feel rushed in my setup, when I feel rushed, that's when I get away from green lights or peak performance. So what I'm hearing from you is some parallels here of slow down, take a breath, take a beat, be able to pause. That might be a lesson here that some leaders and coaches could take from a near death experience. Is there anything else that you think a leader could pull if they're not going to be trapped underwater for 2 or 3 minutes that would be valuable for them?
Yeah, I definitely hope that they don't have experience those situations, certainly. But I think the idea that, if somebody had told me like, "Hey, man, um, you're cocky and you think nothing can happen to you and you can get killed in a second," if somebody had told me that, I mean, just in the same way that instructors, said, "Hey, don't be scared, Babin." Like I'm just bristling at that, right? So it closes your mind, and I think one of the things as a coach that you can think about is, what is the best way to get somebody to recognize um, that they can push harder than they are, or they can be better than they are. There maybe they don't have it all figured out. And I think some ways, is when you, instead of beating someone over the head with the truth, I think just to allowing them to actually recognize the truth for themselves. And you can see that when you stay detached, right? We call this detachment, when you can pull yourself back from the details. And I think that pause is really important. We say on the battlefield, right, when bullets are flying around and, RPG rockets are sailing overhead, it can be really chaotic and difficult to be able to make calls under pressure. We teach our guys to relax, look around, make a call. That relaxes, like, take a breath, calm yourself down. You don't make good decisions, when you're getting emotional about it. And so you got to pull yourself back from those emotions, pull yourself back from the details. That pause is important. And then the look around piece is that detachment. Let me think about what's most important here. And I think you can do that as a coach, to think about, okay, what's the best way? If you're an athlete that I'm coaching, DJ, what's the best way for me to get you to do what I know you need to do in order to be successful? And generally it is not like, "Hey, you think you got it all figured out. You don't, man. I'm telling you right now, you need to just shut up and listen to what I'm telling you to do." The more I do that, the more you're probably going to close your mind, the more you're going to push back, the more you're going to be like, "Oh, Leif thinks he knows everything." And so the better way to do that is to let people reveal the truth to themselves. Sometimes that means you have to let people brush up against the guardrails of failure. It's something that I learned from Jocko, and I don't mean catastrophic failure, right? If you're talking about, but I'm talking, let's say maybe they think they're ready for a training session. You're like, "Okay, well, we're going to put together a training session that's going to be a little humbling." Jocko, for me, and there was another platoon commander. So there were two platoon commanders in Task Unit Bruiser. Jocko was our commander. So it was me and my good friend Seth Stone, who was the guy actually I mentioned earlier, who broke his neck on a later deployment when somebody fell, off the caving ladder. He was a good friend of mine, amazing athlete, Naval Academy grad, a year behind me, and was just a super close friend. And we went through buds together. We went through SQT together. So we had a long history together. And so it was really cool that we got to work together as platoon commanders. And we're going through our workup cycle, and we're running through what we call immediate action drills, or IADs. And what this is like a play that we're running. Right. So if you think of a sports play, right, a play in basketball or football or soccer, where that you're calling the play, lacrosse, whatever sport, you're calling the play and everyone knows what to do and everyone goes there to do that. That's what an immediate action drill is. It's a react to contact. And the playbook was this, we had them all printed out on these on these like PowerPoint slides. And there was a 3-ring binder of, like, and there's 100 of them in there. And so it was like, man, it's really difficult to memorize all those plays. But Seth and I had both been through this workup cycle like a year and a half before this. And so Jocko, came to us and was like, "How are you guys doing with your immediate action drills?" And we were like, we're good to go. That was our answer. And he wasn't like, so at this point, Seth and I had 2 years of experience in the SEAL teams. Jocko had like 15 years of experience in the SEAL teams. So he wasn't like, shut up, new guys. You don't know what you're talking about. You're being cocky, or you think you're better than you are. Yeah, you better listen to me because I'm. If he'd have done that, what would have happened? We'd have closed our minds. We would have been like, oh, he thinks he knows everything. His response was when we said we're good to go, he was like, oh, cool. And he let us go out on the training battlefield. I was like, look, awesome. Now Jocko always operates from a position of humility that maybe we know something he doesn't. So he's like, cool, maybe they're good to go. Let's see how it goes. We go out on the training battlefield, and these are live fire drills, right? So you got targets that are popping up, and these like explosive charges that are going off. Super cool training ranges, but you're engaging with live fire and you're maneuvering with live fire. Very dangerous. So there's a lot of pressure on you as a leader to do this right, or people could get seriously injured or killed. And you're under a lot of scrutiny, and it did not go well for us. It did not go well. We were not at all good to go. And we came back from that operation, and Jocko was like, how'd you guys do? How'd you feel about that? And we're like, man, we got work to do. Hey, can you talk us through these immediate action drills? Let's walk through, in this situation, what would you do here? And we went to the whiteboard, and we had these magnets, and we drew up the scenarios, and okay, what play are we going to call if this thing happens and we get attacked from this direction? And in probably 20 or 30 minutes, we're asking Jocko the question. We were seeking his guidance, which is totally different, right, than him just saying, shut up and listen to me. So we came in with a totally open mind. And we learned more in that 20, 30 minutes than I had in days or weeks of training, prior to that time. So I think this as a leader is when you stay detached, that pause that we're talking about is how can you get people to do what is the most efficient way to get them to do what they need to do in order to be successful. And it is almost never just they're not doing what you tell them to do, yell at them louder, right? It just doesn't work that way. And so I think when you can stay detached, when you can keep your emotions in check and think about the best ways to get them we call that the indirect approach. Instead of the direct approach of beating them over the head with the truth, ask them questions, maybe allow them to brush up against the guardrails of failure so they come with an open mind, seeking your input, and now they're willing to do the things they need to do in order to be successful.
My favorite chapter of the dichotomy of leadership is exactly what we're talking about. Focused, but detached. I think detachment, your ability to detach, is an absolute superpower. This stuff really excites me because I see a lot of coaches out there who have a hard time detaching from their emotions in an emotional game, or detaching from the scoreboard, which ultimately they can't control. And when we become attached, we become so inundated where everything is 2 inches away from your face, where they can't see things around them. And so what I try to do, Leif, is give coaches strategies or some mechanics on how can you detach. And you and Jocko talk a lot about literally, physically taking a step back, so your peripherals can open up, and that's been really beneficial. Sometimes it's, hey, if you can't control your emotions or you can't detach after the game, get out of there. Like, just leave the environment after the game is over so we don't say something or do something that we're going to regret. I would love to double down on the power of detachment. When you hear somebody who struggles with detaching, what are some steps or mechanics that you would advise for coaches if they feel like they're attached to things like their emotions, the outcome, the scoreboard, etc.? What does this look like in action, perhaps?
It's a fantastic question, DJ, and I love that the dichotomy of leadership is been so impactful for you. I mean, it's extreme ownership has reached so many people, and not as many people have read dichotomy, but the people that have seem to tell us that book has impacted them more in a way that helped them understand the nuances of finding balance between these two opposing forces, and really help them, in implementing the leadership principles that we wrote about in extreme ownership. And that focus but detached chapter is a powerful one because I think it's number one, like why are you getting emotional? You're getting emotional because you care. You care about the scoreboard, right? You care about your team winning. You care about your players, and you want them to be successful. And you know that they put in a ton of time and effort into work. And so I think it comes from a good place. It's kind of similar to like micromanagement, right? When business leaders that we talk about, they're frustrated with a micromanaging boss. Well, you can reframe that and say, well, why you're being micromanaged? The boss is asking you a bunch of questions. Why is that? Because the boss actually cares about that project. The boss actually cares about what's going on. Like that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I think you have to recognize that that's coming from a good place. But even still, like it's again, yelling and screaming at people or losing control of your emotions is not going to get you where you need to go. And it really wasn't. I'm a guy who really struggled with that detachment because I'm pretty default aggressive by nature. I want to just make things happen. I want to just run through obstacles that are in our way, and that made me a decent linebacker and fullback in high school football, but it definitely caused me some problems when I needed to be a little like, okay, I need to think about the best way around this obstacle is maybe not right through it, and I think so you have to work on that, and I think working with Jocko, it was the first time that I realized that losing control of your emotions is actually a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of weakness, and I think a lot of times we don't think about it like that. Hey, I need to show everybody that I can throw, my clipboard or, toss the whistle or yell and scream at people. And I'm passionate. And that's just the way I am. And a lot of people will justify that behavior because that's just the way I am. The reality, look, we all have strengths and weaknesses. And I think the question is, does that actually work? Is that actually working? And that's the thing that we ask leaders, well, I'm telling people how it is. And, I'm just honest with them. That's the way it is. Yes, I'm just telling them how it is. And so we'll have to be like, well, how's that working? Are they listening to you? Oh, they're not listening to you. They're getting defensive. They're pushing back. They're doing the opposite of what that you tell them to do. It seems like maybe we need to take a different approach here, right? So I think this is where detachment can help you see those things. And we say detachment is a superpower. And it really is. I mean, on the battlefield, in the chaos of bullets flying around and explosions going off, and some really emotional things when guys are, people you love and care about are wounded and need help. It's real easy to get wrapped into the emotion of that. But when you don't make good decisions, right, you have to be able to that's why we say relax, look around, make a call, take a breath, calm yourself down, then look around, pull yourself back from the details, and then you can make the call to move forward on the highest strategic priorities. That's prioritize and execute, right? What we call our third law of combat. And so you have to train yourself to be able to do that. You have to train yourself to be able to do that. And life provides those opportunities. I lost my cool with my son this morning who refused to change his socks that were out of uniform. He wears, school uniforms. I told him to change his socks. My wife told him to change his socks. We were running late. He's arguing back like it's just fun. No one cares. And I was like, hey man, you're supposed to set the example. Like he just applied for this leadership program. And I lost my cool, and so it happens to all of us. And I was actually just thinking about like, when he comes, it's going to happen. It does happen. When it does happen, what I'm going to do when he comes home from school today is I'm going to take ownership of that. Listen, I lost my cool this morning. I shouldn't have done that. What I should have done is explain to you why it's important to set the standard as a leader to actually follow the rules. And you can't expect other people to follow the rules if you're not actually following them. How are you going to be a leader and help the school enforce the uniform codes and the standards of conduct that we expect, but you're not following them? So that's the approach I should have taken. I didn't. I was frustrated because they were late running out the door, and he was trying to get to, an early morning tutoring session, and so it happens. But I think when you realize that that's not actually what good looks like, and so all you got to do is take ownership of that and implement a solution to fix that going forward. Life will give you opportunities to lose your cool, particularly when you're sleep deprived, particularly when you're hungry, particularly when there's other stresses in your life. Then that's when a contingency plan can help you. Like when you think like, okay, I know that I might lose my cool here. I know that maybe I should walk away. I know that I'm feeling super emotional about this. Let me just take a step back and I'll address the team. I'm going to walk outside for 10 minutes and I'll come back and address the team after that. So these are things that I think you can do when you recognize those red flags in yourself of like, I'm feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My face is starting to turn red. I can feel my fists clench. I can feel my heart rate going up. I can feel my breath. You have to be aware of those red flags. And that's when you have to tell yourself, literally, relax, look around, make a call. I said that, over and over again to myself in my head in the middle of, some crazy gunfights. And I still have to do that with 3 kids at home, and particularly trying to coach them. I mean, my kids, they will want to listen to anybody else in the universe but me. My son's a wrestler, and I had him. I was like, one of his first wrestling matches a few years ago, I was like, hey, bud, you should start warming up. All the other wrestlers out there warming up. He's like, no, I'm good. And I was like, hey, bud, I think you should start warming up. Like, no, I'm good. I don't need to warm up. I mean, just immediately pushing back on me and
This
telling me
sounds this sounds familiar to your story. I'm good. I'm good
the
on the
harder I
wagon.
push, the harder I push. Yeah, like I don't have to do that, Dad. You don't know what you're talking about. And so I just walked over. I was like, okay, like I'm not taking the. I'm escalating it. This is not getting me where I need to go. I detached. I was like, okay, he needs to warm up. Let me just walk over to his coach. I was like, hey, coach, uh, you want you see if you can get Trace to warm up. I'm having a tough time over there. He just walked over there and I was like, hey, Trace, once you get started warming up, he's like, yes, sir. Like jumps out there on the mats immediately and does it. Right. So I think even when you can see what needs to be done, think about the best way that you can get someone to do that. And you have to detach, right? If I just keep escalating, it doesn't get us where we need to go. So take a breath, calm yourself down, recognize those red flags, and think about those contingency plans as well. If I know what I'm going to do before I go into a really high pressure combat situation. Hey, if we're patrolling down the street and when I'm back in the mission planning space before I even get there, if I'm thinking about this before I'm under pressure, if we're patrolling down the street, I could see, if we take contact from the front, I can see there's a big building here. We're going to take down that building and then assess from there once we get to the rooftop. Then it's real easy for me to make the call. So if you know you're going into a situation, you're tired, you're hungry, there's some stress on you, and you're feeling a little more emotional, you got to start running those contingencies. Okay, I'm going to have to be a little overly cautious to not let my emotions get the best of me, to not maybe say things that I shouldn't say. I mean, we were at a football game, a high school football game recently, and just I was watching the coach on the sideline just chew out one of his players in a way that was like embarrassing. And I was just like, man, just not like you have it's not getting the point across that you want, right? You're not going to make it effective. It's one thing to tell somebody they're performing the way they should. They made a bad call, but you're going to deliver the opposite effect, and you're just setting such a poor example for your team when they get emotional, react as well. So think about the example that you should be setting, right? That's the standard you got to live to. I fall short of that standard at times. We all do. But the good news is that's the power of extreme ownership. None of us are perfect. It's humbling but liberating because all we got to do is take ownership and work to get better.
One of the questions I like asking teams when I'm consulting, I'll ask is what are two or three of the things that you guys think will get in the way of us achieving what we want to achieve? Like, what are the barriers? What's in our way from getting to where we want to go? If I take that same question, Leif, and ask, well, what are the barriers to getting coaches or leaders to detaching? I think one is talking. I think it's very hard to detach when you're talking. If you want to detach, shut your mouth. I think you have to be quiet and you have to be able to observe and you have to be able to take in all of the information in order to detach. It's really hard to detach if you're constantly blabbing your lips. Would you agree to that? And if you were to add a second one, what's another barrier that gets in the way of coaches or leaders being able to detach?
Yeah, no question. I think that's spot on. Jocko has this position where he kind of crosses his arms, like this, and he kind of puts his hand on his chin, and he kind of takes this position right here. I call that like the Jocko listening position, and it works well because you're forcing your mouth to stay shut. And I think I think for a lot of athletes, and coaches that are, are prior athletes, like yourself. I mean, this is you want to get in there, solve people's problems, like you want to make things happen. And I think a lot of times people just need to vent about stuff, right? So if someone's talking to you and they just need to vent, and I want to jump in and solve a problem for them right away. You know what? I just need to listen, and I can hit this listening position, and maybe kind of once they've kind of talked through something, maybe it takes me an extra 45 seconds or a minute to hear that. Maybe it's 2 minutes, whatever. That's not a lot of time, right? To invest. So, like, okay, now they've gotten that off their chest. Now let me ask, and now instead of, hey, you should do this, let me ask them some earnest questions that allow them to reveal the truth to themselves. Hey, what do if my daughter's telling me that she's frustrated with, one of one of her teammates on her sports team, and that they weren't passing the ball to her, and how should I handle that? And so I think just asking them a question of like, hey, what do you think would be the best way to handle that? Why do you think they might not pass you the ball? Or is there ways that you can pass them the ball more, or be more of a team player? Or, say talk about ways that you can set things up. Instead of just berating them, with the truth. And so I think hitting that listening position is really important. That definitely is a physical reminder to listen. I think the biggest hindrance, though, the reason that we want to talk is ego. The reason that we want to talk instead of listening, it's ego. And I think because we think we know better, we think we all have the answers, and so this is the biggest hindrance. I think it is ego. When you actually think, or like I said before, like justification for bad behavior. Well, I just tell it like it is. That's the way I am. I'm honest, I'm straightforward. I'm authentic. I'm not going to pretend to be somebody I'm not. And instead of like, well, how's that working out for you? And how's that working out for you? We had a coach that came to one of our events a few years ago, who had told us, that it was like their seventh coaching job in a matter of just a few years, and they kept talking about, I went to this place, I thought it was going to be great, but then that team was screwed up, and then I went to this place, and the faculty I was working for was terrible, and then I went to this place, and so the Jocko answered the question. We this was a Q&A at one of our extreme ownership muster events, where we have live Q&A, and this guy standing up in front of the crowd, and everybody else could see it, but this guy, right? When you're like, hey man, what's the Jocko asked him, like, what's the one common denominator here in all of these seven different coaching jobs that you had? The common denominator is you, and you're telling us it's everybody else, every place that you've been, and it was I think, a rude awakening. I don't think he ever considered that until that question came. Which is like, it's this person's fault, and it's this person's fault, and it's this person's fault, and there is no perfect place, right? There's no perfect athlete, right? There's no perfect school or whatever. A perfect league. I think there's always going to be strengths and weaknesses, right? I love the Thomas Sowell, the famous economist, quote. There's no solutions, only trade-offs. And so I think these are things that you're going to have to deal with frictions. You're going to have to deal with problems, but you are the common denominator. And if you're going to blame everybody else and not take ownership, you're never going to actually solve those problems. And so what is driving that? Ego. Ego is the sole thing that's driving that. The moment that we can put our ego in check and say, hey, DJ wants to do something different than me, he, I might actually be wrong. Let's let him run the warm up for today and see if that works out for him. Cool. Let's give that a shot. All it is keeping an open mind, right? And I think there's even if it's something that I know that my plan is probably better than your plan, if I allow you to put your plan in place, then you could come back and say, you know what, your warm up was way better than mine. We tried that, and man, I didn't feel as good, and so let's go back to your plan. Like, now you're on board with the plan, rather than me just saying, no, your plan sucks. Do it my way. This is the way we should do it. So I think it's all ego driving that. If you could put your ego in check, keep an open mind, stay humble, it will allow you to take ownership of problems, listen to other people, and I think it solves so many problems. Just to put a fine point on this, we've worked with thousands of leaders at Echelon Front across just about every industry in the business world. We work with first responders, we work with military units, work with sports teams, at the professional level, at the collegiate level, at the high school level, and it is any time that we see a major issue on any team and you start pulling the thread on that issue, at the root of that problem is an ego problem. And so ego is just one of the most destructive forces you can ever imagine in any organization. So don't let your ego get the best of you. Put your ego in check. And I think when you do that, you will set you and your team up for success.
This is fantastic. So what gets in the way of the superpower of detaching? Talking, ego. Another thing I might add, Leif, is perception. I think perception changes behavior. If you want to change somebody's behavior, change the way they see things. What I mean by this with coaches, if you have an inability to detach from outcomes, detach from emotions, detach from the moment, change your perception. How do I do this? What are some ways? Well, coach, if you drove 2 hours west and walked into a gym and said, hey, do you guys know who I am? Would anybody know who the hell you are or who your team is? No. If you went to another country and said, hey, I coach football at this place, do you guys know anything about my program? Hell no. Even at a university, let's say like University of Texas, if you go over to Africa and say, hey, I coach at Texas, do you guys know anything about my program? Probably not. So I think what happens is we get so caught up in the attachment because we think we are the center of the universe. We think everybody's watching. We think everybody wants us to win. Nobody wants us to lose. In reality, life, nobody's freaking watching. And what I think we get caught up in the sand trap of attaching ourselves to emotions when we think everybody, all eyes are on us, we have this spotlight on us. And I know that might be really aggressive and assertive for some people. I might not say that to every coach out there, but sometimes you just need to be told, look, not everybody's watching like you think they are. And that perception can really change the way you go about things. I had Jim Schlossnagel on my podcast. He coaches at the University of Texas. One of the things he does routinely, him and his team, they go to the Children's Hospital in Austin, Texas. And they check in and they work with kids there on a random Monday throughout the season. Why? Because it changes their perception. Sometimes when he gets so caught up in the media and everything that's been, and that's at a very different level, very high level, he gets himself a strategy, a contingency plan, if you will, to check into these hospitals and work with these kids who they'll never play baseball. They're just hoping to make it another month. And these parents who are going through these difficult situations. So for him to detach from the emotion of baseball, he has a strategy like that. And I think that is such a great idea on coming up with strategies and knowing you aren't the center of attention and purposely putting yourself in other environments to feel, oh, this ain't all about me. What do you think?
I think that's fantastic, man. And I think that the most successful coaches that I see, they look at their most important leadership, the most important leadership role that they have is is to teach life lessons to their kids. It's not about getting them ready for the NFL or the NBA or whatever. But hey, because most people aren't going to make it to that level, right? But it's getting them ready for just teaching them life lessons, right? So about teamwork and about discipline and about ownership, and I think those are. I think when you look at sports as simply the means to learning those life lessons, right? These are lifelong lessons you can apply in your world. I think those are the best and most fantastic coaches that I've seen. But man, your good shirt that you had on that we were talking about earlier, I love that shirt, and that's exactly what that is, right? This famous video that Jocko did that's had millions and millions of views. Echo Charles, made that video of Jocko, talking about this, and he used to say that stuff all the time, like, "Oh, this bad thing happened was good. We're gonna learn from that. We're gonna get better at that." And I was just talking to my nephew. His name is Luke Babin. Is one of the top quarterback recruits in the country at the high school level, and I was talking with my brother and my nephew Luke, and they were talking about the ranking systems and how the ranking systems are kind of all over the place. And Luke's really underrated. He's a quarterback commit to University of Vanderbilt as we speak here, and I'm really excited about. He's a super talented young man, a great kid, and really proud of him. And but he was just talking about like my brother's all he's like, man, the rate, he's underrated, and we know he's underrated. And I was like, good. Awesome. Like, this is the worst thing, is to be overrated, right? To go into a situation where you have all these giant expectations and you don't meet them. Underrated is awesome, right? You're the underdog. People don't believe in you. I mean, that's a real challenge for a coach I mean, someone like Nick Saban, right, at the college level. I think one of his greatest traits as a leader was to take a top ranked, LSU and then the Alabama teams, and make them feel like the underdog, play like the underdog. People don't respect you, or this is you got to live up to these expectations. And so I think it's just simply reframing that to like, hey, oh, they underrated you. Awesome. This is great. This is an opportunity for me to go out and demonstrate, what I can do. It's such a great opportunity. And so it's just that, we got a guy on our team named Rob Jones. He's a Marine combat engineer, lost both legs above the knee in Afghanistan, and a fantastic guy. And he ran 31 marathons in 31 days. On his prosthetic legs. He's a machine, incredible athlete. And he gives a presentation at our Extreme Ownership Muster, which is our 2-day leadership conference that I mentioned earlier. And his presentation is own your attitude. Like, when something in life happens to you, you can't control that. He can't control that he stepped on a bomb and lost both his legs, but he can control his attitude. He can control how he responds. And there's so much power in that. I think that applies absolutely to the sports world and to coaches and to players and to teams. That attitude of good, no matter what happens, you can learn from it, right? You'll get better from it as a result. And those life lessons, I think, are more important than any career that you can have. Because even if you do make it all the way to the professional level, At some point, you're not going to do that anymore, right? At some point, you're going to have to move on from that professional career. And sometimes I get SEALs that will call me and I'm an old guy now. I mean, most of my teammates have retired, or there's only a handful of them that are still left. But they'll call me and they're upset about what's going on in the SEAL teams, and they're frustrated and about this isn't happening. We're not employed the way we used to, or training's not the way it was. And look, not that those concerns aren't real, but I will just remind them, hey, someday you're not going to be in the SEAL teams anymore. And you're going to look back on that and wish you could be and realize that was the best job in the entire world.
Hmm.
So you should relish it every day. And I think all that is just a reframe of the challenges that you're up against. The good old days that you're going to look back on years from now are right now. So enjoy them.
I want to talk a little bit about discipline. What is your advice to somebody who's listening that wants to be more disciplined?
Yeah, I think discipline is powerful, man. This is something where there's areas of my life where I can be very disciplined. And there's other areas of my life where I'm not disciplined at all, or really struggle. So it's something that you have to make sure that like you teach your like one of the most important things I think you can learn is discipline, and the disciplined effort it gives you the freedom to excel at the highest level possible, and that applies to individuals. It applies to teams, and I think if you look at anything that you're trying to do. I always love the Peyton Manning quote. When he was talking about, he's like, "Man, I may not be the most talented guy. I'm not the fastest guy. I'm not the strongest guy. I can't throw the ball, as good as others, but nobody's going to outwork me." And I think that's that hard work. It requires discipline to put in the hard work. It requires discipline to come in early, to stay late, to put in the extra effort, and that gives you the freedom to excel. And I think a lot of times we look at people that are doing well and we think, oh, they just got lucky, or they were just born that way and everything's great. And you don't see the hard work and discipline it takes that they're actually putting in the time and effort that it takes. And I mean, that was Chris Kyle, the American sniper, from the movie and the book was my lead sniper point man in Charlie Platoon. Fantastic guy, an incredible teammate and friend. Absolutely hilarious, by the way. He was not really the dark and brooding guy that was kind of portrayed in the movie. Um, he was an incredible guy. Constantly laughed, constantly talking smack, but also just an awesome operator, and did a ton of damage to bad guys. And so when his kill counts as a sniper in Ramadi started going way up, I had people on my team that would be like, well, I'm a sniper and I've only killed a handful of guys. He's already killed a ton of guys. Like, how's that really possible? And so they'd kind of start to, they'd say either he's lucky or they'd kind of like start to question his numbers or whatever. And I'm watching all of them, right? Because as the platoon commander, I get to see these operations. I'm not a sniper. I'm getting to observe them from a detached position. And what I saw was Chris, while other guys are playing video games and maxing out their bench press for a new PR, Chris is in the intel shop. And we're looking at imagery and we're talking about where the next operation we're going to do is and how we could get into this area and how we might mitigate the risk and what buildings we could utilize. Then we'd plan patrols and we'd hit those buildings and we'd get up into positions that might possibly work. And we'd also hit a bunch of different fake positions just so the bad guys would know where we're coming. And then when we got into those positions and set up a sniper position, Chris would be on his gun looking down the sights of his weapon for 3 straight hours, until he couldn't do it anymore. And then he'd rotate off the gun. And I watched the other guys, and they'd be there for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And then they start kind of sitting back a little bit. And then next thing you know, they're kind of just sitting in a chair and their guns in front of them and they've got binoculars and they're glancing every once in a while. Guess who was more successful, right? Chris. Yes, he was lucky, but he made his luck through discipline, preparation, and execution. And I think that just applies everywhere in life, right? If it's you can make your luck through discipline, preparation, execution. Yeah, you can't control the natural talents that you're given, but I think, like Peyton Manning said, man, hard work will beat talent. And look, if you got natural talent and then you combine it with discipline, hard work, that's unbeatable. So, but I think that discipline to prepare and to make yourself better and to constantly look and grow and work hard and put in the extra effort when others aren't is all powerful.
What do you think some leaders perhaps get wrong about discipline?
Yeah, as you know, we wrote a chapter in dichotomy of leadership, uh, train hard but train smart, and I think I think sometimes you can push too hard. This is discipline, and we have to do this, and we kind of joke. People will take the "What would Jesus do" mantra and replace Jocko in that. I don't recommend you replace Jesus with Jocko. Jesus is very important, and I think Jocko would certainly second that as well. But I think a lot of people will say like, "What would Jocko do in this situation?" And they look at Jocko, and he looks like an axe murderer, and so they think that he would react in a certain way. And what's interesting to me is that the people that say this oftentimes are 180 degrees out from what Jocko would do. They're absolutely wrong. They are completely wrong. And so when you look at somebody like Jocko, you think he's going to yell or scream or he's going to tell people like it is and say, shut up and we're going to do it my way and I know better than you. And he absolutely never did that because that's not what good leadership looks like. And in fact, I worked with Jocko for over 20 years now. And despite his looks of looking like an axe murderer, I cannot think of a single time where he actually raised his voice and yelled at me in like a scolding manner, not even one time. And I'm sure I gave him hundreds of opportunities to want to do that. It's not that I didn't screw things up or make mistakes or do dumb stuff, because I certainly did plenty of that. But that's not what good leadership looks like. Now, I'm not talking about, hey, I need everybody's attention right now. Hey, there's a time when you got to raise your voice to be heard over the sound of gunfire. I'm talking about yelling and screaming as far as like, berating people or critiquing them, in a harsh manner. He never did that ever, because that's not what good leadership looks like. I wish I could say that I never did that to my guys. There were definitely times when I lost my cool. And when I did that, I had to actually backtrack. I had to actually dig myself out of the hole. I had to do some damage control. So again, losing yourself, control of your emotions is is definitely a sign of weakness. Don't allow yourself to do that. But I think it also comes to discipline when it comes to like you can burn out your team, right? If you were pushing them so hard that they don't want to train anymore. They don't want to continue in the sport. And you see really good athletes that were super talented people are like, yeah, I don't feel like doing that anymore. They're totally burnt out. And I think we live in a world today where, this focused sports. I mean, I try to give my kids, I think particularly for kids, right? Parents want to live vicariously through their kids. And, I didn't play in the NFL, but my son can. And, this was a dream of mine and we're going to push him hard. And you just see that a lot. And I think that becomes a real problem where, one of the things that Jocko talks about with his kids, he pushes kids too hard in jujitsu. And the thing that he should have done is make it fun. He should have made it fun. And I try to do that with my kids to remind them. And, my son was definitely an all-star caliber baseball player this year in his little league team. He loved playing baseball, and it was a real kind of breakout year for him to really be a star on his team after, just playing baseball for several years. And I said, hey man, he loves to hunt and fish. So I was like, hey, we could be here every weekend, and be on the All-Star team if you want to play All-Stars, or we can go down to the beach and do some fishing. You tell me what you want to do. It's like fishing all day long. I'm like, cool. That's what we're gonna do. The worst thing I could do is to push him hard so that he doesn't want to play baseball anymore. I want to make it fun for him. I want it to be fun for him. It doesn't mean I don't want to encourage him. There are plenty of times when my kids don't want to go to wrestling practice, or they don't want to go to jujitsu practice. All right, these are tough sports, and I'll say like, okay, cool, we're gonna go watch. You can just sit on the sidelines and watch your teammates practice. And it has it one time. There's not even one time where they haven't actually joined the class and participated. So I think there are times to push. Right? You want to train hard. You want to push your team, and you certainly, if you're not pushing your team hard enough to get them ready for the kind of tough situations, then you're failing them as a coach. But if you're pushing them too hard to where they're burnt out, to where their performance gains are starting to slide, and they're not properly recovering, or that they're just mentally like they're just over it, right? And they're tired and they don't want to do it anymore. You're not benefiting them in the long run at all, right? So I think it's really finding that balance, and it's a tough dichotomy to balance. I think you're only going to see that when you're detached, when your emotions are in check, and you're detached enough to be like, you know what, maybe we should let's call practice for the day. And let's give them let's give them a day of rest here. And there are times in Iraq leading a SEAL platoon where I did that. Like, hey, let's roll this operation 24 hours. Guys are burnt out. Guys are tired. They've had a lot on their plate. I don't think it's the right call for us to go out. This operation, we can push it 24 hours. It's not going to be a huge deal. It's not like critical intel that's, that we only have, for the next few hours. Let's roll this operation and give everybody the night off. And I think there's times when you got to do that.
Leif, I got one more for you. What's your advice to leaders or coaches out there who get held back by other people's opinions?
Yeah, it's a great question, man. I think this also is a dichotomy you got to balance, right? Because you can have the person that everybody around you is saying, like, man, DJ, I don't know if that's a good call. I don't know if I'd do that if I were you. And you could be like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm just, this is just the way I am, and I'm going to do this anyway. That's a problem, right? If everybody around you is seeing an issue that you're just not detached enough to see for yourself, that could be a problem. On the other hand, if you're only doing things, to try to prove something to other people, that's no way to live either, right? And I think these are things that, like, if you're just doing things to try to impress other people or to say you did them, man, I think you're setting yourself up for failure, right? Because if the measure of your success is accolades from other humans, man, other humans will just let you down, right? They'll find ways to be jealous. The more successful you are, the more haters that you get, right? The more people that point fingers at you or want to talk trash about you or try to undermine you in some way. And you have to be willing to accept that. So I think it's a balance, right? I think you need to rely on people for guidance that are around you, that are detached from your position, but particularly the people that that love and care about you and that want you to be successful in what you're trying to do, and rely on them. Ask them questions, ask them for guidance. But on the other hand, yeah, if you're driving motivation is simply to try to impress other people, I think you're going to set yourself up for a miserable existence. And at the end of the day, I think you gotta be able to look yourself in the mirror and know that you're doing things for the right reasons to help people. Again, like I said, the best coaches that I've seen are people that take this charter that they have as a coach, as a leader of future generations, to teach them life lessons, right? To be a mentor to them, to make them good people and good citizens who are going to be able to coach the next generation of people, right? And help the next generation of people. And I think those are the coaches that are most successful. It's not about how much money they made or how many titles their team won or any of those things. It's like, hey, do they have good people? Like, do they have people that they keep in touch with, that come back to them and say, "Hey, thank you for the lessons that you taught me. Thank you for instilling these lessons in me. And here's the difference that it made." And then watching those people go on to successful careers, maybe not even in sports, right? But maybe they become a doctor or they become a lawyer. They launch a business and they do something that has impact in the world. And I think that should be your measure of success: is how are you actually impacting the world? Are you making more leaders? Are you training up the future generations to go out and be successful humans, to live better and more impactful lives, and to make a difference? And so I think that should be the driving measure of success, not how much money you make, how many titles you win, because that win at all cost mentality, I think, it is going to set you up for failure, where you're gonna make decisions that you're probably not gonna be proud of. That when you look in the mirror, and so I think that's a dangerous thing to fall into that trap, and I think you've got to balance that dichotomy.
Leif, you were a leader in the SEALs for over a decade. You fought in one of the most violent urban battle zones in the Iraq War. You've been awarded some of the greatest honors that our country has to offer. You've been around some incredible leaders. You are an incredible leader. What's one piece of advice that you would give to all the leaders tuning in today?
Man, I'll tell you what, that makes me sound pretty cool, DJ. I'm not near that cool, and I think the only thing that qualifies me to talk about leadership is that I've made just about every mistake that you can make as a leader. I've been humbled by those mistakes, and I think deeply about those mistakes. So the advice that I would give to leaders is that you are not as good as you think you are, and you need to get better. And so it's a lifelong journey of learning, of growing. And the moment that you feel like you've arrived and you got it all figured out, you are setting yourself up for failure. It's humble, as we said before, right? It's be humble or get humbled. And this idea that you got it all figured out is wrong, man. You're not as smart as you think you are. You're not as good as you think you are. A question I learned from Jocko is, A question that he asked himself back in the day: if you're so smart, why aren't you winning? If you're so smart, why aren't you winning? You think you got it all figured out. You think you're so smart. Why aren't you winning right now? Because again, you got to put your ego in check to think, okay, if I'm trying to influence the team to do this, if I'm trying to get my team to perform better, if you're doing the right things, you're going to be successful in that effort. You're going to make your team better. You might not win every single game. You're not going to win every single title. That's just simply not realistic. But you certainly should be on the path of growing and learning and get better all the time. And that starts with putting your ego in check and being humble and realizing that you have to learn and grow and look to improve all the time.
Leif Babin, you're a legend. Thanks for being on the show. How can my listeners best support you?
Man, anybody that wants to follow us on social media, I'm at Leif Babin, or you can follow Jocko at Jocko Willink, or at Echelon Front, our company, which is a leadership consulting business. We run leadership training events, like our 2-day leadership conference that I spoke about. If you want to come check out one of those events, or our field training exercise program, or bring us into a company to talk about leadership, that's what we do. It's an honor to be able to work with leaders and pass on these lessons learned and to be able to help others. And really just an honor to be on your show with you, DJs. Appreciate what you do. And I think taking lessons from life and applying it to sports and coaching, to make people better in every capacity. I think we talked about discipline equals freedom. And I think so much of the discipline in my life, it is rooted in physical training and discipline. I think it starts there. And if I get that right, it sets everything else in motion. So thanks to you, and thanks to all the listeners and coaches, for what you do. Really honored to be here with you today.
Thanks, brother. Let's keep in touch. Appreciate you.
Look forward to it.